Hello my quilting friends! My name is Leah Day and welcome back to the Friendship Quilt Along. Today we're quilting our Patchwork Daisy. This is block number 12. It's one of the simplest, fastest blocks to piece, so I decided to stitch it up a notch with free motion quilting and undulation in the background, one of my favorite quilting designs. So let's jump on the machine and learn how this works together. So here we are on block number 12, ready to knock it out with a super simple quilting design. So I have decided to do a spiral within the petal shape. So it's going to spiral out, then cross the center and spiral in the other side. And I'll do that twice to fill in those petals. And the outside, I'm thinking more undulation, one of my favorite designs from this year. And I think I'll tuck that in and kind of go around these petal shapes with that design. So I'm working with normal free motion quilting, so I need to change my settings. I have a normal straight stitch on my machine in the center position. I need to lower my stitch length to 0. What that's going to do is that's just going to limit the movement of the feed dogs. Those are the little teeth on your machine underneath your needle and your foot. And those teeth like to feed your fabric forward. Where with free motion quilting, we don't need that to feed forward. We want those feed dogs to basically just go away. But I don't like turning my feed dogs off or dropping them because I find that messes with the tension of my machine. So I just lower my stitch length. That pretty much just makes the feed dogs bounce up and down, and that's it. I also wear gloves that helps me get a grip of the block. And as you can see, I also have this grid glider. It's a slippery polyester sheet that goes over your machine bed and just helps your block or your quilt move a lot easier. Okay, so we are ready to get going. I'm going to get started swinging around that spiral. And like I said, I have marked this on the quilt. Well, it's very faint marking. It's not going to show up all that great, but I just wanted to get a kind of a game plan going for the spacing, how this is going to fit and fill, and I think this is going to look awesome. So I'm going to swing around. My main thing is I want to loop around enough times and then come out and have and be able to kind of sneak over to the other petal and have those really look good. So I'm going to come on down. Now with free motion quilting, you know, it's really a balanced ratio of the speed that you're moving and the movement of your hands, so that, you know, if I get started and, you know, I'm not really pushing on the quilt, well, you know, I could end up with some really tiny stitches. I really need to make sure that the block is moving at a slow, steady pace. But as you can see, I'm running the machine fairly fast. And this is one of those things that I think a lot of quilters not necessarily get wrong about free motion quilting, but just it's a common issue that beginners have, and that is not running your machine fast enough and then moving your hands too fast. So you need to run the machine faster than you think and also push your hands a little slower than you think. So just think about that and see if that kind of helps you out whenever you start free motion quilting. Okay, so I have just taken my thread tails, which were on the surface of the quilt. I've tied them in a knot, and then I'm going to bury them in the middle layer of the quilt using a cheater needle. Now you can find a much more detailed tutorial on that at leahday.com/hide threads, because that is a very important technique. As you can see, I do it very quickly because I want to get right back to quilting. I don't let that bog me down, but I always do that every single thread break. I do that every single time because I want to make sure that my thread tails are nice and secure. So now I'm coming in here, going to jump across these ditches, across the center of that block, and I want to hop in here and do the exact same spiral design. This is working out so fast. Look how big that was, how much space we covered in just that short amount of time. I love it. All right, so here we go. Come in. This time I'm going to try and leave the block in one position. This is another advantage of free motion quilting, is that you don't have to rotate. You know, other styles of quilting, like walking foot quilting, you have to rotate the block all the way around. Well, with this style, I can leave it in position and just simply move my hands. Now, it's a little bit of a struggle because I have to be able to see what I'm doing. Right now I'm quilting backwards. I can't really see, so I just have to crane my neck over a little bit and look behind the needle and try and follow the line I've marked. And just remember, if you're sitting in a contorted or awkward position for a long period of time, And just make sure that you do some stretching or something afterwards. It is one of those things you have to watch out for when quilting on a home machine, that you're not doing anything that's going to hurt your body in the long run. So there we go. That looks awesome. And just brush on that fabric a little bit to erase my marks. And I like to mark my designs with the Fons & Porter ceramic marking pencil whenever I'm marking on medium to dark fabrics like these. When I am marking on lighter fabrics, especially anything that I know I've pre-washed, it's going to wash out, then I use my fine line water-soluble blue pen. Now with this, you have to actually soak the quilt in water in order to remove the marks completely. So keep that in mind. A lot of people make a mistake with that particular pen because they just spritz some water on the surface. That's not enough. That just disperses the chemical that makes the ink. It doesn't actually get rid of it. You got to soak your quilt to get rid of that. Okay, so I just bring my thread tails up to the surface, and that is how I'm going to quilt those petals. I'm going to do the other petals the exact same way. I'm going to go on ahead and get started on this background. I want to kind of get a little game plan going because I really want a nice effect. I'm thinking something like undulation to kind of come around, but you know, I don't want it to look like I'm trying to messily echo the petals. I don't think that would look very good. And when I traced that with my finger, that's kind of what it felt like. It felt like a messy echo. I don't really like that idea. So I think instead what I could do is just kind of come in and maybe from this corner, come into the center and then come out that corner. So instead it's more like I'm making a V shape. I really like that idea better rather than kind of looping around the petal. I'm going to start off the edge of the block in the corner. And in order to do this, I just need to make sure that this fabric is really, really smooth and flat. I'm going to take out, these are pens and pen mores that I use for basting, and I just take out a couple of those in this area. Make sure that your foot is in the down position. I have this particular darning foot, I've noticed, really, really tricky to tell if it's in the down position or not. So I have to always double check it. Yeah, that's looking good. Okay, so I've gotten my threads locked, it's ready to go, and I'm just going to come in and kind of just wiggle around. That's my goal here. Really free form line. An undulation is a design that I started using at the beginning of the year, and it's so freeing, it's so crazy and wild. There's not really a rule for it, other than if you stitch, you know, the same thing too many times in a row, completely stop doing that. It's kind of just a basic, really irregular echo. And it starts with the foundation. So that's what I'm setting in place right now. I'm wiggling around these petals. I'm going to come up, and it's not really going to be like a point, but I'm just going to kind of come in here, wiggle all the way in here and do something kind of funky. So let's see what I can manage. I don't think I want to come to a point. I think I want to come to maybe kind of a bulbous teardrop. I think that will look better to go with the undulation design. Yeah, I like that. That looks good. Okay, and now swing around. And you might be wondering why I'm rotating the quilt as much as I am, because this is free motion quilting. I don't have to rotate the quilt around this much. And the reason is I need to be able to see what I'm doing. And I also need to be comfortable, able to quilt it smoothly and easily. And I don't like it when I can't see what I'm doing. I also really don't like it when it just feels awkward, like my hands are in a very weird contorted position. So that's why I stop and shift anytime it feels right. Anytime what I'm doing doesn't feel quite natural, that's a sign I need to stop and shift the quilt around. Okay, so I would go on ahead, and if this is your block, I would go on ahead and do that kind of curly, wiggly foundation line through the entire border. But I'm going to go on ahead and start my undulation effect because I'm really excited about this and I think it's going to be super cool. So you're going to start out further apart, you're going to bring those lines closer together, and then you're going to create some really irregular gaps. So already you can see I'm stretching these gaps out, nice inch and a half apart. I think I'm going to dip inside and add an echo to that little teardrop shape in the center. I think that'll look really cool. Now, anytime you're feeling like, oh man, I just can't see, or that just feels awkward, the quilt block's kind of fighting me, anything like that, just rotate it around. It's absolutely allowed. I'm going to swing out, maybe kind of pull that outward even more. You really want to just keep the lines irregular. And this can be actually harder than you think. You know, a lot of times, you know, we get into that habit of perfect echoing, of perfect, you know, echo ditching, spacing everything exactly a 1/4 inch apart, that it can almost be a struggle to do things really irregular and free form. And it's just a skill. You just have to keep building that skill for making things wild and different sometimes, and, you know, kind of more of a formula and more precise in other times. Now, I do like to secure the edges of the block whenever it's convenient, so that's why I stitched along that. We're already getting a really nice undulation effect. I love this. Okay, sorry. When I tap my foot, it brings my needle up, and I don't always want it to do that. So here we go. Get my needle back down, get back started again. And this is another thing. You've got to watch out for getting off the edge of the block, that your foot, especially an open toe foot like this one, can kind of catch on the edge of the block and pull it over. So watch out for that. There we go. Oh, I like this. I like this a lot. Now I'm going to come in, and because I can't, obviously I don't want to go and make this area more and more dense, I'm going to come in and kind of U-turn right there, almost like a mountain peak. And we've used this design before. We used this in the tree block, you know, in the Tree of Life block. That one was really neat. It's just a fun freeform texture, and I really think it suits so many different styles, and it's kind of become one of my defaults. Like, you know, if I'm kind of just not feeling very inspired by something, I put undulation in it, and all of a sudden I love it. It is one of my favorites. And as you can see, it's also very fast. Because there's no travel stitching involved with it, it's much quicker than you know, a design like, let's say, Paisley or McTavishing, something like that. Those designs involve travel stitching where you have to stitch right on top of something else, and you have to be a little slower in order to stitch that precisely. Well, something like this, as you can see, I just stitch right off the edge and into the batting area and then travel stitch down, and I'm already pretty much knocking this out. So as I said before, the only real rule is anytime you seem to be doing the same thing too many times, change it up, do something different. So right here, oop, I was missing that pin more. That was what was hanging at my foot. I could tell something was hitting it, but I couldn't see it because it was right behind the foot. But here, I could come in and I could kind of just, you know, kind of keep the same distance that I've kept before, but I really want to bring that actually closer together. As I said, you don't want to do the same thing too many times. You want to mix it up. Here I'm bringing those lines much closer together, and then I'll widen them out here, and then I'll bring them closer together through to the end. I think that's neat. Whoop, that was a big stitch. Good thing is that's actually on the edge of the block where I don't think that's going to actually end up in the quilt. Keep in mind, this is a Quilt-As-You-Go quilt, and we're going to do a victory lap and trim up these blocks, and they're actually going to be smaller than the size that they were pieced. So I did a really, really big stitch right there, but I think it's okay. So here we go, get back on track, and I'm going to just continue to echo this last little section right here until it's complete. I could not be more pleased with how this has turned out. Whoop, and I ran out of bobbin thread. No big deal. You know, if this happens to you, you're in the middle of quilting and you're kind of on a roll and really enjoying it, you know, don't worry about it. When you run out of bobbin thread, it's a very, very simple process of getting back on track. You just pick back on those thread tails. I'm just pulling up on my top thread and pulling back on my bobbin thread, so that way I get longer and longer thread tails. That's how that works. And then I just take those thread tails, tie them in a knot, and bury them in the middle layer of my quilt, just exactly the same way I did before. And again, there's a much more detailed tutorial on how to do this at leahday.com/hide threads. But yeah, anytime I end up with short thread tails, let's say a thread break, you know, my bobbin thread runs out, the top thread breaks or gags, you know, something like that, I always do this. I just pick out those thread tails, tie them in a knot, bury them in the middle layer of the quilt. No big deal. And you can see I'm already ready to go again, back on track. And then to change the bobbin, when you have a grid glider in place, you just lift up that grid glider and pop out your bobbin, and then pop in the new one, just like so. You gotta make sure that bobbin's turning in the right direction. And I find some of these, like there's like an automatic cutter here where you can cut the thread. I oftentimes find that that's a little bit actually too short. So I'll put my case back in place and hang on to my top thread, drop the needle down, bring it back up again, and bring that bobbin thread up to the surface, and it's nice and long. I find usually when I cut the thread in that bobbin case, it oftentimes comes out too short, and then I have a real struggle getting it up to the surface. There we go. I did take off my gloves for that, just simply because I have trouble with the latches and stuff when I have gloves on down there. Okay, there we go. Drop my foot. And this is the tricky part about getting started whenever you've broken thread. Getting started right on that spot where you broke thread. You drop your needle right down in there, pull on that top thread, bring up the bobbin thread, and then you get right back on that spot again. If you shift it over a little bit, you get right back on that spot, drop the needle in the down position. That puts it in jail. You can't go anywhere else. And then just take like one tiny stitch to lock that in place, and then get started quilting. Don't sit there and build up thread in place. I call that the glob of thread method. It's really gross. It builds up thread and it really puts a knot on the back of your quilt, and it's not any fun. I don't feel like that's very secure either. So as you can see, I just get started, I start quilting, I stitch away from that area, and then yet again, I can just tie off and bury those thread tails, and you won't be able to tell that's where I stopped and started quilting. That's another thing, that glob of thread method. If you just sit there and stitch in place over and over and over again and build up thread in that area, you'll be able to really tell that that's where you stopped and started. And I just find that it's not very secure. That's why I tie every single set of thread tails into a knot, tie it off, bury it in the middle layer of the quilt, and there we go. So that is how I'm going to quilt this background. I'm going to go on ahead and travel stitch down. Since I'm already all threaded up and ready to go, I'm just going to stitch right along the edge of this block through to the corner, and I'm going to repeat this exact same set of steps. I'm going to set my foundation with the undulation. That kind of rhymes. Set my foundation with the undulation and swirl through this whole corner, and then I'll echo it and fill it in until it's completely filled. So let's build this foundation one more time, just so that way you can see how it's going to work, especially building it off this corner that's already done. I think I'm going to stitch over just a bit more and then into the block, and I'm just swirling in. I might actually bring that kind of close together, and then I'll kind of tuck around that petal shape, take out some pens and pen moors. I tuck around that petal shape. I really like that. Whoops. Watch out if your machine is like mine, where you just, a little tap makes it go needle up. Just watch out for that. And if it does, just sink your needle right back down. Try and get right back in that same spot, and then you won't end up with a long loop of thread. There we go. I think I managed to catch that. You just don't want it to make a really big stitch. That's no fun. There we go. Now I'm going to work my way into the center. And don't forget, it's A-okay to rotate your block around. There's no law that says you have to stitch with, the block in one place all the time with free motion quilting. You need to be able to shift it around. Look at this. I need to be able to quilt this section. I can't just leave it rolled up like that. I need to be able to get in there and see it and stitch it. And in order to do that, it's got to be flat on my table so I can see what I'm doing. So here I think I'm going to come in real close to that edge, and then I'm going to make kind of a deep curve here. The more interesting you make your starting lines, the more interesting you set that foundation, the more interesting your undulation is going to be. And here I'll just S-curve all the way off into that corner. There we go. Now just travel stitch along it, and that's what I'm going to wash and repeat. I'm going to keep these lines nice and far apart, so that way my block ends up nice and open, and my quilt ends up being soft, But as you can see, it's just a matter of travel stitching and messy echoes throughout the finish. And here's what it looks like whenever I finished this beautiful patchwork daisy. So that's it for this video. I hope you learned a lot and you're excited about giving this patchwork daisy a try. If you'd like to follow along and find the quilt pattern to guide you, you can find all of the patterns and all of the tutorials I've shared so far at leahday.com/friendship. We are almost done with Friendship Quilt Along, of course, but you can join in the fun anytime, even if it's years after I have finished sharing this quilt along. The videos and the tutorials will all remain online indefinitely. So come and join in the fun at leahday.com/friendship. And until next time, let's go quilt.